to my channel. My name's Catherine Morgan. I'm a qualified financial planner and multi-award winning financial coach. Now, we started these videos to bring you some of my best work, and they'll be coming out to you every single week. So make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell icon for our new videos. Now, today we're going to be talking about 5 tips for you to save money through mindful spending. Now, this could be the answer to some of your money worries, because how we feel about ourselves and our own self-worth and confidence can really affect how we feel and how we behave around money. So stay tuned until the end, because I've got a special little extra that will really, really help you. Now, when you believe something, you do things that reaffirm this belief. So if that belief that you are honouring doesn't actually serve you, or is maybe not even true, it forces a behaviour that may be holding you back, holding back your confidence, holding back your knowledge, holding back your self-worth. So here are my 5 top tips to save money through mindful spending. First of all, what is mindful spending? Mindful spending is the feeling of feeling good about what you're spending money on. It's about knowing what brings you happiness, knowing what brings you joy, knowing what brings you worth. So my first tip is to be mindful. Now, the easiest way to be mindful around your spending is to look at your spending habits, to bring awareness to those spending habits. And actually looking at what you're spending money on tells you so much about what you value. If you're spending £100 a month on books, for example, and it adds value to your life, then don't beat yourself up about that spend. I had a conversation this week with one of my money circlers who came to this weekly call that we had and said, Catherine, I've looked through all of my bank statements and I've racked up loads of spending on courses and memberships and mentorship programs, and I've decided that for the rest of 2019 that I'm not going to buy any more. And I thought, great, that's great that she's brought that awareness to her spending. But then I actually questioned her and said, how much value did that bring to your business this year? And she said, oh my God, it was amazing. Like, I've learned this, and this. I said, okay, so actually what you've made this decision based on the emotion, and the emotion that we unraveled for her during that conversation was guilt and shame. She felt really guilty and full of shame that she'd spent all of this money on coaches, courses and memberships. But the reason that she felt like that was because she was looking at everybody else and she was having conversations with other people. She was having conversations with her friends who weren't running businesses, friends who didn't necessarily recognize the value that those courses, memberships and mentors were providing to her. So when I actually challenged that belief, part of the belief for her was also around the fact that her dad always used to say to her when she was younger, that if, don't spend money on big things, because you've got to watch the pennies and they watch the pounds. So that was the message that she heard growing up. So every time she spends big sums of money, she gets huge amounts of guilt and shame. Now that belief has come from not her, but from her father. It's her father's belief that may have come from, God only knows where that's come from. It could have come from his childhood, from his parents, from the society that he grew up in at the time of his childhood. So actually that belief was kind of like passed down the generations. But in reality, when she looked at the value that provided for her, it really made her question what her decisions were around money. So I suggest that you think about how can you bring awareness to your spending? Now, one of the easiest ways to do this, and I see a lot of this with the work that I do in the Money Circle, is that people will go back and say, well, I've just had a look at the joint account and I've looked at all the direct debits, and that's great. Like, it's great to have awareness of your bills, but actually that's often the easy one, because it's not often the account where all the spending happens. Am I right? Often the spending happens on credit cards or it happens on individual accounts. So be mindful of your own spending. Take some responsibility of your own spending. Tip number 2 is to stop comparing yourself to anybody else. Comparison is literally the root of all evil, because it shouldn't matter what anybody else is doing. It shouldn't matter what everybody else is spending their money on. It matters what you're spending your money on, what brings you financial well-being, what brings you joy, what brings you happiness, may be completely different to anybody else. I spend a lot of my money on books and programs and courses and mentors. Now, Some of my friends may think I'm a bit nuts, but that's what brings me value because it helps me to improve my personal development. It helps me to increase my learning. And I would far rather spend my money on things like that than I would perhaps on, let's say, a gym membership or golfing lessons, for example. So it's thinking about, what is important to you, not what's important to anybody else. Tip number 3 is to identify your triggers. Now, we've talked about this on previous podcast episodes, but this is about bringing awareness to the emotion that you feel at the time when you feel triggered to make an impulse purchase. Now, impulse purchases are very rarely a good decision to make in any situation. So if you're fearful of money and you can feel yourself resenting or resisting making a decision or perhaps finding out about how to invest, for example, if you're finding yourself in that space, try and understand what the trigger is. When is it that you're feeling like this the most? Is it when you're tired? Is it when you're hungry? Are you trying to make these decisions when you've just come home from work? Are you making these decisions first thing in the morning when you're in a rush to get ready to get to work? When are you trying to make these decisions? So have a look at your diary and think about when would be a really good time in your week for you to be making those kind of decisions. Change the mood, change the situation, talk it out with somebody. Sometimes if we really fearful about something because we don't understand enough about it, which, let's face it, financial education, certainly when we were growing up around school, was shocking. So it's no wonder that we often fear money because we just don't understand it. So talk it out with somebody. Think about who you know that is an expert in the area that you want some support with and reach out for some help. Tip number 4 is to try and remove those triggers. So once you've identified maybe what the emotion is and when you feel it, try and remove those triggers. So changing the mood, changing the situation can help. But also, removing those triggers is great. Changing situations, for example. But actually couple this change with the behavioural changes, and that's when the magic happens. Otherwise it's just a shallow temporary change and the behaviour will actually end up returning because the belief hasn't changed, it's just the behaviour that has. We've got to change things at belief level to get long-term lasting change. Have you ever noticed, for example, when you commit to starting a new diet, or maybe, you're going to say, from Monday, I am going to commit to blocking an hour out in my diary every week for some me time. And then the end of the week's happened and it hasn't happened, right? Because we all suffer with all good intentions, and it doesn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is because we haven't changed the belief that is driving the behavior, that's changing the habits. So impulse buys are rarely a good thing. They are a release of temporary dopamine, which may give you that kick and that high once you clicked online and purchased a new book or a new pair of shoes or a wicked great big handbag or something like that. But it will rarely create long-term satisfaction. So some of the quick things that you can do to try and avoid impulse buys, and we are coming up to Black Friday. This is the time of the year when the majority of people are highly triggered by impulse buys, and shops know it, companies know it. They use very clever marketing techniques to get you to act on the impulse. So they will be targeting those emotions, ladies. So watch out for that one over Black Friday. Think about making a list of things that you actually do want to purchase this Black Friday and stick to it. So think about removing those credit card details from companies like Amazon or companies that you're regularly spending from, unsubscribing from those marketing emails that are going to tempt you. Perhaps you can filter them into a separate folder so that they're there as and when you want to go into them, but you can have a bit more control. So going back to tip number 3, identifying your triggers. If you identify that you're highly triggered to spend impulsively after work, for example, don't go into your email box after work. And the other thing I would suggest, particularly coming up over Black Friday, is maybe impose on yourself a browsing ban. So you know what it's like when you're sitting on the couch in the evenings and you're watching EastEnders or you're watching a Netflix series and you're browsing on your phone, on Facebook, on Instagram, and cookie tracking is very clever. If you've just been on a website and you've accepted those cookie browser options, then the likelihood is very shortly you'll receive some kind of Facebook marketing banner that comes up in your feed that's tempting you to go back and buy that dress. Very, very clever. So, consider having a browsing ban, particularly at the times of the day when you get those emotional triggers. Now, the final tip I want to leave you with is to encourage you to really think about understanding how you can release the shame and forgive yourself around financial decisions that you may have made in the past. I've just spent an entire week in Facebook this week going through a 5-day challenge. Many of you listening to this would have experienced that challenge and will know from that some of the exercises that we did that acknowledging sometimes that our emotions do serve to protect us as well as sabotage us. So if you have made a bad decision in the past and you're holding on to that belief and you're holding on to that emotion, then perhaps in many ways it's serving you. It's protecting you from making the same mistake again. It's protecting you from making the same decision again. But it's really important as well that if you're still holding on to that sabotaging belief, then you want to let that go. You want to be able to forgive yourself for that decision. You made that decision at a time that was important for you at that moment. I remember back in the early 2000s when we bought a house, 2006, 2007, I think we bought it. And obviously the markets crashed very shortly afterwards. We'd actually by that time moved out to the Channel Islands and we lived out there for just under 5 years. We came back and we sold the house, having owned it for 7 years. And we sold it for exactly the same as what we bought it for. And I remember my husband and I having this conversation that, gosh, we were never going to make that mistake again. But actually, when you think about it, we didn't make the decision to buy that house knowing the markets were going to crash. I mean, I was a mortgage advisor at the time, for goodness sake. We didn't know what was going to go on at that time. So we made that decision based on the information that was provided to us at that time. Now, we could have kept that belief that, oh God, we make terrible decisions around money. And if we'd held on to that belief, that would have self-sabotaged our future behavior. So we had to really dig deep and work hard and forgive ourselves for, okay, maybe it was a bad decision. Maybe it was a bad decision because actually we massively overstretched ourselves financially and we suffered the consequences later. That was probably the worst decision out of the two, which was in our control, whereas financial markets are never within your control. So don't worry about things that are out of your control, and forgive yourselves for those decisions. Literally say out loud, I forgive myself for that decision. That decision served me at a time. It protected me. I have learned X, Y, Z from this decision, and I forgive myself. So try that. If you're really holding on to a self-sabotaging belief, you want to be able to let that go, because when we don't feel worthy, we end up developing patterns that prevent us from actually having the money that we want. And when we feel that we aren't good enough, we also fear that we won't ever have enough. I'm going to say that one again. So when we feel that we aren't good enough, we also fear that we will never have enough. So do yourself a favor and give yourself permission to stop self-sabotaging. So I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do me a huge favor and leave me a comment below and let me know what your biggest takeaway was. Now, I promised you at the start of this video that I had a little something extra to give you if you want to dive deeper into this subject. So I've created a special free Dear Money template that you can go and download right now over at themoneypanel.co.uk/Dear Money. That's themoneypanel.co.uk/Dear Money. And here you can download your free template to write your own money letter, to really explore that relationship with money and get more mindful to some of your money beliefs. You can also check out some more information about this topic on my website, or tune in every single Monday on the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. And remember, small steps, big wins. Bye for now.